Hello and welcome back to I Will Knit and Spin If I Want To. I'm Andrea Mowry of Drea Renee Knits, and this is where I try to answer your questions to the best of my ability. So today, again, I am wearing my DRK Everyday Sweater, just a different one. This is the original, knit up in Mountain Meadow wool, and I just can't say enough good things about this yarn. It's really delightful. So yeah, you can see it's quite different from my Handspun version I wore in the last episode. It is very cold here. It dropped to, I think it was 2 degrees yesterday with a feels like -15. I had to wear snow pants on my walk, but today it's got into a balmy 6 degrees. So I also have on a floor length dress, leggings, wool socks. Yesterday I had on 2 sweaters. So we're just kind of trying to stay warm here. So let's get into some questions. I also have some finished yarn to show you and a sneak peek of a pattern coming out in just a few days. Okay, yeah, just a few days. I had to think about that for a second. So let's start with questions. Question 1. I'm a big fan of yours from Belgium. Well, hello. I am just a beginner in knitting. I am currently knitting your ginny. I've learned a lot from you already. My question is there a more convenient way to knit the sleeves? Those are small circles that we knit. I don't like turning my work with every row. I have the impression that I lift and turn my work more than I am knitting. That's why I like doing the body. So yeah, you do have to do this turny deal. And I think what makes it stand out so much is how cumbersome it can feel to do that. Sorry, I must have shook my desk a little. How cumbersome that feels when you have a whole body of a sweater attached. Although, that wouldn't be the case for Ginny. That's knit bottom up, isn't it? I think it is. Oh man. Well, this is gonna change my answer. I think that one's bottom up. So that changes things. But I'll give the answer for what I was thinking for top down. So one thing I will say is that's like the one thing with top down sweaters is when you go to knit the sleeves, the body's already knit, so you have this small circumference that you have to like flip the whole sweater around, and it can be a little cumbersome. But what I will say is once there is a couple inches on my sleeve, I don't keep flipping it around. I actually rotate my knitting back and forth like this. That way I'm not dealing with that big heavy sweater doing this all the time. But if I'm remembering correctly, this is the thing. I have well over 100 patterns now, I believe. And it's funny how like once I release them out into the world, it's like they just like poof. And my brain fills up with the next one, you know? So I'm like, how did I choose to knit that? I'm pretty sure. Sorry, I must be very active today. I'm knocking the camera around. I'm pretty sure I knit that one bottom up, which means you're gonna knit those sleeves and put them on hold, which is actually less cumbersome than the top down thing. But yeah, that's just small circumference knitting for you. You can try small circulars. Some people find that a lot more fluid. So the ones I use are Chow Goo, and the tips, they're interchangeable needles, or you can get fixed too. You can just buy fixed needles. But the tips on them are only 1 to 2 inches. So 2.5 to 5 centimeter tips. And then the cords are like 4 inches. 10 centimeters. So they're tiny. I will say I have found that the people who seem to like love them right away are English style knitters or throwers who carry their yarn in their right hand. The people I have found that either don't like them or take longer to warm up to them, like me, are continental knitters, also known as pickers, who are holding their working yarn on their left hand. And I actually, to get used to them, went back to English style knitting just to get used to how tiny they were and to get my hands okay with that feeling. And now I can use them continental as well without minding so much. But you might want to try that. That might feel like you're not turning all the time. I guess I don't know what method you're using, if you're using double pointeds or magic loop. Yeah, I don't think you say that there. The other option is you could try adapting some patterns to seamed, even just the sleeves. I actually know a few people who do that. They really like a seamed sleeve, so they knit all of their sleeves flat. I'm not one of those people, but that is what's so great about knitting. We all just get to do whatever method feels good for us as an individual. And I don't think it would be too tricky to figure that out for most patterns, although you're still going to be turning, you know, at the end of every row. But as you get, especially to the top of the sleeve, that's gonna feel like a little bit less. So I hope some of those tips, maybe one of those will work for you. Next question. I have a question about mistakes. I've been knitting since I was a kid, but only really started taking on more complex projects this year. The problem is, except for drop stitches, every time I make a mistake, I'm really hesitant to go back and fix them. When I do frog or tink, I feel like I end up making the mistake worse, whether it's missing an increase, forgetting a brioche yarn over, or twisting the wrong stitch. It's like I can't figure out how to put anything but a normal knit or purl back on my needles without making a mess of anything. Do you have any tips? So I do, a few. So one thing I'm gonna say right out the gate, and I know I've given the spiel, here it is again, because of course I don't know what episode I did it in. The first thing I recommend is a lifeline, and this is why. A lifeline, which is a thin piece of yarn, string, embroidery, floss, what have you, that you run through the live stitches on your needle, and then you just leave it. You let the tails hang out of either side of your work, and you keep working up from there. What this does is if you do make a mistake, you can pull your needle out and just frog or tear down, and nothing can drop beneath that thread or string or piece of yarn. They're all your live stitches are gonna be stuck there. Then you can just replace your needle and start again. The reason this is the first thing I'm gonna bring up is because I think of it more as an insurance policy and a confidence booster. One, there's always you bring an umbrella, it won't end up raining. You put in that lifeline, you probably won't need it. But if you do, you can now have the confidence to dig into that work, make those mistakes worse, whatever you want to do, and that's fine. Because if you completely muck it up, you can just tear it onto your lifeline. It doesn't actually matter. And so I think it takes the pressure off. Our hands don't sweat so much. Our stomach releases that tension. And it is the only way you're ever gonna learn to fix those mistakes is by trying. You won't just magic that knowledge in your head and hands. You have to do it. And I got pretty good at fixing brioche mistakes, basically because I had to, because I was designing a lot in brioche right after learning how to do brioche. And that is the nature of designing. I'll actually share a little bit of that. I'm gonna share a further sneak peek of my new design. But also I was teaching brioche, and I wanted students in my class to feel like they just got to dig into learning brioche. So if it was just a little mistake, I'd go help them figure that out so that they didn't have to spend all their time on that, and they could really just try to get their hands used to doing brioche. So, and especially with brioche is a really, not complicated, but the anatomy of it just looks a lot different than regular stockinette stitch. So when you look at it, it can kind of look like gobbledygook, especially if you pulled out a needle. It's like, where do all these extra strands of yarn go? So by having a lifeline in your work, you will be able to do what you need to do to learn how to fix those mistakes. And if you mess it up, it doesn't matter. Just pull down to that lifeline and start fresh. Couple lifeline tips. My favorite material for lifelines is embroidery floss, because it's generally, you can get it for really cheap. It's really nice and smooth, and you can separate the plies. So if you're working on, let's say, a lace or fingering weight shawl, you can take it down to 1 or 2 plies and not have it be too thick in your work, so it's not in your way. To put a lifeline in, the easiest way to do it is if you're using, let's say, circular needles, I would push all my stitches to the cord, just because when they're on the needle tip, that is going to take up more of the, it's going to fill up the space of the loop of yarn that is your stitch. When you put them on the cord, you've got a little air around each stitch. So then you just put your lifeline material, let's say your embroidery floss, onto your tapestry needle, and you just run it straight through along that cord, straight through all the stitches. If you have interchangeable needles, you can just, there's a little lifeline hole. Can you see me looking? Oh, I do have. I'm sitting here looking for needles so I can show this. Okay, so you're getting a little sneak peek, barely. I'll show more later. Okay, so that little hole, boop, right there. That is a lifeline hole if you have interchangeable needles. Not all interchangeable needles have them. These are Chow, my favorite interchangeables. They do have them, so does Haya, so does Luca. Eddiclicks don't, but you can get an SOS cord that you actually like push the cord and it pops open and does the same function. So you just put your embroidery floss right through there, and then you just knit your row per your directions, and it just drags your lifeline right through all your stitches. I love this method the best for a couple reasons. One, it's not going to slow you down so much. And two, you know you're not going to miss anything, especially when you're doing something like brioche. So when we're doing brioche, there's a lot of extra strands of yarn going across our needle compared to regular stockinette stitch, and you don't want to miss any of those. Couple other lifeline tips that I tend to get questions about. Can you go back and place a lifeline once you've made a mistake? No. You can try. Give it a go. But especially in projects where things are going to be the trickiest, we're going to have the most trouble trying to fix those mistakes, lace, cables, brioche, actually trying to get that lifeline accurately into every single stitch the way you should is just really slim. So again, it's our insurance policy. Hopefully you never have to cash it in, but it's there if you need it. As far as when to place lifelines, I always say, how far are you willing to reknit? If you're at the end of like a 400 stitch shawl and it takes a whole episode on Netflix to knit each row, you might only want to have to reknit maybe 5 rows. So I would just keep moving that lifeline up. You know, every time you get to another 5 rows, replace your lifeline. Or before you do something scary. So let's say you're doing a bunch of decreases or increases in brioche or lace or something like that. I would put my lifeline in a clean, like non-shaping row, if possible, below that, so that if you do make a mistake and then you're trying to fix it and it goes haywire, you have a clean row to land on. Just make sure that you mark in your pattern where you have placed your lifeline, because if you have a memory like mine, you're not gonna remember. So it's a really good idea to mark that pattern with like a little star, a little LL, so you know where you put that. And yeah, from there, it's practicing. It's getting in there. It's not being afraid of your knitting. I mean, the greatest thing about being a knitter is we can tear things out again and again and again and reknit them. I mean, this shawl that I'm going to show a sneak peek of a little bit later, I have torn it out and restarted it 6 times, I think, so far, maybe 7. Now I think I'm good. I think I'm smooth sailing. But yeah, I just, especially as a designer, and maybe there's other designers out there who don't work this way. I'm sure there are. I am a get it on the needles and figure it out that way kind of a person. I need to try things with my own hands. I need to see them with my eyes, to conceptualize them, to see if I like this or if I want to change it. And shawls especially are my tear out and reknits. I know every single time I cast on a new shawl design, I know I'm going to tear it out a few times. It's just how it goes as I decide what shaping is going to be best for the stitch patterns I want to use, or how I might want the colors to play together. It's just part of the process for me. So don't be afraid to get into your knitting, dig it apart. I know it can definitely be frustrating, but I think that's where the Lifeline's gonna save you, because you won't have to worry. And I think that'll also boost your confidence, because when we have that fear going in of, every time I do this, I make it worse, you know, then we're kind of adding stress to the situation. So put a Lifeline in there and just try. Try all the different things. You know, I will say, because you mentioned dropping a yarn over in your brioche, so that fix, once you figure it out, you're gonna be like, oh, this is the easiest fix ever. Really, all you have to do is see which side of your work the yarn over fell onto, and then you're just gonna take your needle tip and pick it back up. And you just need to make sure it's straddling the shoulders of that of the stitch it goes with. So that's the only place where you might have to see if it's laying correctly one way or the other, and you'll know because it'll look more like it's hugging up on its honey. All right, so oops, this went off. Oh no. The thing with the questions just died. So professional, Andrea. So let me just go back here. Okay. I don't know why that's not charging. All right, well, hopefully that will kick back on in a second. In the meantime, I'm just gonna read it very loudly from back here. And in the meantime, y'all get to see my amazing blanket again that my grandma knit me. She's the reason I am here right now attempting to answer your questions, because without her, who knows if I ever would have been so lucky to find knitting. Oh, this might work now. We're good. Okay. So, okay. Oh my goodness. This is when you all get a reminder that I am very low tech. And look at, there's my baby from a long time ago. So this is where you have to just bear with me here, folks. Okay, let's keep going. All right. Oh, so I had so many of you ask this question. I love your DRK everyday sweater, and that you knit with your Handspun. I know the pattern is written in stockinette, but it looks to me like this particular one was knit in reverse stockinette. Good eye. Did you just knit it as written and wear it inside out, or did you alter the pattern? Thank you so much. So I 100% knit it as written in the pattern and just turned it inside out. The only thing you have to think about when doing that is picking up stitches for the underarm. You want to be a little bit aware of not causing bulk there, but to be honest, I mean, unless you're walking around like this, I don't think anyone's gonna notice if it has an extra ridge right there because you're wearing it inside out. If you're worried about that, I have a tip though. So you cast on stitches right here when you're working a sweater top down. So when you come to pick up stitches for the sleeve, the stitches, when you look at that little cast on edge, it is going to look like little sideways V's going along that edge. Pick up and knit into only one leg, and it's gonna really minimize how bulky that is when you wanna wear the purl side or wrong side or reverse stockinette side out to the world. But yeah, that is all I did. So it's really great. It is my favorite for, with that Handspun, I wanted to soften the stripes that occurred from what I had spun. And then I also love it for fading. So it's really, the bumps of pearls blend and take down the contrast much better than the flat stockinette knit stitch does. So that's just a great tip in general. If you're ever trying to get your fades or color movement to be more cohesive from one color to the next, try adding texture. Garter and reverse stockinette are my faves. Okay. Okay. When your kids, so I get this question a lot too. When your kids were little, toddler ages, how did you find time to knit? I'm not wearing my headphones today because they're being funny. So I'm trying to face towards y'all for the sound. So this is why I'm being weird. How old were they when you could dive back into your craft? I'd love for my daughter to see me knitting more often, but she's a little too fascinated with yarn and how fun it can be to unwind a yarn cake. She's 2 years old. So I love this question for a couple reasons. One, I think any of us who've had small children can understand that challenge of, in part, just having some time for ourselves when we are raising little people, and trying to do things we love while raising very curious little babies and toddlers and small children. But also, we joke about it now, but one of my favorite quotes from when I was pregnant is my mother looked at me, and of course I was like knitting up a storm, and my mom looked at me and she said, enjoy that while you can, because once that baby comes, you're not gonna be able to knit anymore. And it kind of broke my heart a little, like, what do you mean I'm not gonna be able to knit anymore? Like, how could you say this to me? But it's funny because now we joke about, like, I showed you, I started my business when my daughter was 8 months old. So I absolutely knit when my kids were babies and toddlers, but every parent's experience is gonna vary so drastically. So while I will share tips that worked for me, also, now that my kids are 5 and 7, I will say the whole, the days are slow, but the years are fast thing is so unbelievably true. My son, who's my youngest, I'm just like, where did my baby go? Where did my babies go? So it does go really fast. So soak that up too, of course. But I think the best tips I can give is small, portable, easy projects. Socks, hats, garter stitch shawl, anything that it does not matter when you have to put it down, because if you're doing anything too complicated and you have to set that down and then you go to pick it up and you're like, where was I? You know, so the easier it is to be able to read it, or like not even need to be able to read where you are in it, is excellent. Like anything just to give yourself that joy of making, even though life is busy right now. Like letting it be simple if that's what it needs to be. I love to carry, I've talked about this a lot on here, but I have a few knitting bags that are really easy for me to carry around the house. Sometimes they're big. Like lately I've been carrying a giant tote bag around my house. So I carry that from room to room, by the way, still to this day. I always bring my knitting everywhere, even if I know I'm not gonna end up bringing it out. So always having your knitting handy, because you never know when all of a sudden your 2-year-old's gonna get distracted, when she's gonna start playing with a book or a toy, and you're gonna have 5 minutes, and all those minutes add up. And then I absolutely took advantage of nap times. Even though there was probably times I should have been napping too. That was I'm gonna drink a cup of coffee and I am gonna knit. And also I probably stayed up too late, but so I would end up knitting in the evening as well once she went to bed. My daughter was my first, so. It changed, you know, once my son came and I had 2 under 2, that was trickier. But again, taking advantage of nap times, oh, how great it was if it happened to line up and they were both napping at one time. But even, yeah, just always having it on you and letting it be projects you can jump in and out of quickly. Instead of ones where you're like, I gotta get to the end of this row or I can't set it down, would be my best tips. And knowing you will have time again. But yeah. It can be fleeting and then you'll forget how little time you had to do it. So, but I think those are kind of my top ones, is definitely having it be a simple project that you can carry around everywhere you go, because you just never know. And then asking, you know, if you do have a partner, maybe saying, hey, I need an hour a week where I can just sit in it. I think that's an idea too. Okay, next question. And I will say, I think it's great to expose your kids to you doing that as well, because my kids, they'll pick up yarn and talk about how pretty they think it is, but they don't mess with it. I mean, by the time they could consciously understand any of it, you know, like, it's always been my work. So that probably helps too, because we'll say, oh, that's mama's work. You know, you can't mess with that too much. But I think even like our dog, like I've never had an issue with pets or kids just being destructive with my knitting. So that, I think the more they're used to seeing it, you know, like right now she's probably pretty excited about it, but the more she sees it, the more she might kind of lose interest because it's just part of the house. Okay. I'm a brand new spinner and just recently learned how to chain ply. It's so much fun. It is so much fun. So my question is, when you would want to do a chain ply versus a double ply? By double ply, I'm thinking you mean 2-ply. I'm also trying to decide if I want to spin a sweater quantity for your nurtured sweater or spin some fun yarn for your DRK everyday socks. Any advice would be on which would be a better project. So I am gonna go in reverse for this one. I would recommend doing nurtured before I would do the socks, only because nurtured, as I said, I guess because it reflects my own journey. If you are a newer spinner, I mean, there's pros and cons to both. Spinning for a sweater is going to give you a boatload of practice, and I think that nurtured is so forgiving because of its texture. So I had a really great experience doing that. I spun for socks later because the thing to think about with socks is you need to have a strong yarn so that those socks don't just fall apart. And I guess it depends a little bit on how fine you spin and how much twist you put in your yarn. Just thinking about like and the way I'm saying that, like, of course that matters. But I mean, if you're a newer spinner, for me, what I didn't want to do was battle kind of what my body was doing. So I let myself just enjoy, I'm losing my words. Oh, you're probably all going to be shouting it. The word for like the yarn you always spin. It's gonna drive me bonkers. Anyways. Oh, it's gonna drive me bonkers. Okay. Anyways, I would go with whatever one you feel most comfortably that you just fall into that spin naturally. Whichever one will get you closer to one of those two projects. So if you are a really fine spinner and you love to spin up a 3-ply for some socks, try those DRK everyday socks. You said socks, right? Yes, you did. Okay. If you tend to spin, maybe right now in your journey, you're still spinning a little thicker, even a little thick and thin, that's when I would do a 2-ply for the nurtured sweater, would be my advice. So for chain plying, a couple things to consider. The main reason I would ever choose to chain ply is basically because of color. So I want to keep all the color in a braid. Oh, well, this isn't the best example, but I'm still going to show it. Actually, I have another one right here. Although, how beautiful is this? This is from Akara Yarns, and I can't wait to spin this. I am going to spin this for socks. But okay. Chain plying. This is like a cloud. Wow. This is from Nest Fiber, and I I can't handle how soft this is right now. Okay. So let's say I was gonna spin up this fiber, but I did not want to mix any of my colors. I wanted it to be a self-striping yarn that kept all of these colors separate and move from stripe to stripe. That's when I would chain ply, because that's what you're gonna get. The other bonus I love about chain plying is you never have any yarn. See these bobbins? Whoop, where's my hand? Do what I want. There. See these bobbins? Those have a little bit of yarn left over from plying that I did the other day. And I love that with chain plying, you get to use up everything on your bobbin. But it won't create as even of a yarn, as consistent of a yarn as a 3-ply would. So a chain ply is gonna give you a 3-ply yarn, but the way that yarn distributes if you're actually plying together singles from 3 different bobbins is the thick and thin bits are gonna more evenly kind of fall into each other over the strand of that yarn, where chain plying, you're folding them back on each other. So it sounds, I think you said you're a pretty consistent spinner. Maybe you didn't. But that would be something to consider. Oh geez. That was my water bottle. Sorry, I thought I had a chain plied skein behind me. Okay, 1 minute. Entertain yourself for 10 seconds. Okay. This was my first skein of chain plied, which I really need to knit. This is... I think this is also Nest. Oh, and it is a delight. And I'm pretty darn happy with the consistency in there, especially because this was also my first spin on my e-spinner. So I just really went for it with all the new things. First time chain plying, first time on my e-spinner. And this was a superwash merino. Oh no, it's not superwash. Just super fine. It is super fine. So anyways, you can see how it has chunks of color. So when that's knit up, it'll be self-striping. So it'll be like bands of color, which I love for like a pair of socks. So when I wouldn't want to chain ply, I would base it mostly on how I want my color distributed. So if I wanted a fractal spin, I have one. Here it is. This was fractally spun. So this I also pulled out. We'll just go hop into a little quick show and tell real quick as well. This is also Nest Fiber. This is their recent, it was the November Club, which I loved. Blues and oranges are like my favorite. And I spun it fractally, and this was the first time I tried moving my singles to a new bobbin before plying so that I wouldn't rough up my worsted draft I had done. And I will say I was surprised. I really did notice that they stayed smoother after doing that. So I could see when that would really be worth it. So this is fractally spun, so you can see there's barber pulling. So in here, the colors are going to, once they're knit up, there's going to be areas where they look just more all over blue. So it's still kind of striping, but what happens is there's a blending and like a shifting from one color to the next, which this is going to be more stripes than blended. That makes sense. Okay. Next question. How do you measure the length of your handspun? I'm a new spinner. Oh, we had two new spinners. Okay, sorry. And so far only have a nitty knotty to measure my handspun. I spin fairly consistently. That's where I had read the consistently. but I have never gotten around to counting the strands on the Nitty Knotty before skein up. There's just too much yarn on the Nitty Knotty to count. Thank you for sharing more of your spinning journey. So you don't have to count it while it's on the Nitty Knotty. I do think a Nitty Knotty is a great way to at least start having an estimate, like an idea of about your yardage. So you want to check to see how you have your Nitty Knotty set up. Like mine can be anything from a half yard to 2 yards would be the full loop of yarn that it's creating. So once you take it off, that is when you'd want to count those strands. And if you feel like it's too much to count, I would probably make smaller skeins because you are going to want to know that yardage. The other thing you can do, I have a super skeiner from Acreworks, and that has a yardage counter on it. So that does it for you. I will say it's pricey. I only have one because it was a Christmas gift last year from my husband. So that one is an investment. I also, because I maybe it's the designer in me, I'm really trying to get like as close as possible to what my yardage actually is. I also seem to not trust anything. I'm like, I don't trust the Nitty Knotty, I don't trust the super skater. So I'm always like, but is this really how much yardage I have? Because like the super skeiner, it's basically a Nitty Knotty. And as you're stretching your yarn over there, depending on how tight or loose you do it, and if your skein after washing grows or shrinks, then what yardage do you have? So I also have a yardage counter from Fiber Art Supply. Whew, I remembered. I'm looking at it. It's over there on a table behind me. So they have an actual yardage counter, and that's less expensive than the super skeiner. And that one's kind of cool too, because it basically just winds the yarn around this little thing that turns another thing, and all the things turn. It tells you your yardage, but you could use it for any yarn. It doesn't have to be hand spun. So I basically do those few methods, and then I feel like I have an average. You do not need to do all the methods. That's just me being silly. But a Nitty Knotty is great, but you do have to count the strands. Now there is another method to yardage that involves, I swear there were like beakers and a weight system that I have never done because it looked real intense to me. Somebody will probably chime in here and tell us about it. So I would go with the Nitty Knotty method. Essentially, it just depends on how concerned you are about your yardage. So that may just be good enough so that you have an estimate, you know. All right, so let us wrap up here a little bit. As I said, I have some sneak peeks. So because we're kind of talking about spinning, I'll show this one first. So here is my hand spun shawl, and I am super stoked with how this is turning out. So this is using 2 different skeins of yarn that I spun up. This is from Hedgehog Fibers, and this is a true like grab bag of fun. I separated all of my club fiber bags I had gotten, and I grouped colors together. This was the pink dominant groups, and I just spun it. I did not even worry about a thing. I just spun it up into a 2-ply, and it's a giant, I think there's 8 ounces of yarn here. Or 800 yards. Can't remember. Anyways, I have it written down, don't worry. But delightful. And I'm pairing it with a neutral, which I love. Like, do you see how much it tones it down? Like, it just takes it from being like full volume and just like turns it down a little bit. So this is Cormo. In 2 different undyed colors that I just marled together, and I'm really enjoying it. Super fun. Which brings me to something that I meant to say last week that I think is like a tip for me, like my own advice that I'm giving to Andrea. Andrea, I have some advice for you that I really hope you'll take. And you've been pretty good about knitting with your hand spun, better than you thought you'd be. Side note, it took me a while to even go take the spinning class because I just didn't know how I'd fit it into my schedule. I already write knitting patterns. I was concerned about, I don't know if I can use those for patterns. Like, can I use my own Handspun? And was just trying to figure it all out. So I was worried that I would spin yarn and I wouldn't use it, because I think spinners fall into that anyways. They just spin the yarn, but then they don't knit it or weave it or crochet it. So I was very concerned about, will I actually utilize this yarn? And I have a couple of sweaters. I've knit a sweater for my son. Like, I've got some projects to show for it. But why I think this advice, Andrea, is so important is you don't understand the yarn you're making if you don't use it. You know, like, I've been thinking about that a lot lately. And probably because I'm knitting with my Handspun right now, and I'm just thinking about, like, wow, you miss out on so much feedback, all the nuances. Like, if you don't actually go use that yarn, there's so much information that you're not gonna know. So that right now has just been like my mantra. Like, I gotta knit this yarn I'm spinning, so that I can be a better spinner, and in turn a better knitter. Because when you start to understand yarn construction and fiber content and all that good stuff, I mean, wow, it changes your knitting. You know, I had no idea about the importance of plies and things like that. Even a few years ago, I didn't have a full understanding of it. I wouldn't even say I do now. I mean, I am right in the thick of it, but it's just really cool. I'm very excited about it. So knit with your Handspun or other people's. Do you know are you a spinner? No? Do you know any? Snag some of their Handspun that's just languishing on their shelf. Okay, the other sneak peek I have for you is a new cowl. So this is coming out next week, and oh my goodness, if you could touch this. So this uses Spin Cycle Yarns Nocturne, which is like super moody, really kind of dark, cozy color transitions, and Ching Fibers Surrey, melted baby Surrey. I think it's melted baby Surrey alpaca, which honestly is like, if I ever want to add texture via yarn, it's like my fave. It's so fuzzy, so cozy and plump. I just love it. Anyways, I wanted, as it's been getting so cold, I wanted the ultimate cozy cowl. So this is it. Here she is. So that's gonna be warming up my neck on these frigid days. And it can warm up your neck too. So that is gonna come out next Tuesday. And I think I'm gonna end this here. It's lunchtime. I'm hungry. Oh, I did want to share one last show and tell. So as I shared last week, I have been working on this marled Handspun. Not sure what I'm gonna do with it. I was thinking sweater. I don't know that I'm gonna be able to stretch the yardage. I mean, I have no qualms about knitting up a tiny little crop sweater for dresses, but I don't know if I'm gonna be able to eke out enough yardage. But I did want to show how, so I am making rollags out of it. So that came in a braid, which I think I showed in the last episode. And then I'm making these cute little rollags on my blending board. I have an Ashford blending board. I got it from Port Fiber here in Portland, Maine. And yeah, so this is what I spin from to create these airy, squishy yarns. So I have 2 more braids to spin up and ply up, and then I gotta decide. If it's not enough for a sweater, I think I'm gonna do another shawl. Apparently I'm just back in shawl town. I'm enjoying the accessories these days. Okay, I am just chatting away, and I'm gonna end this here. So yeah, I hope you have a great weekend. Maybe you do some spinning or some knitting or just some looking out the window and taking some deep breaths for a minute. But whatever you do, I hope you have a lovely weekend, Thank you so much for joining me here. I wouldn't be able to do this without all y'all. So have a great weekend, and I'll see you back here next week. Bye.